What's going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Rage, back with another Outriders WorldSlayer video to bring to you, and today we're actually going to be covering the meta firepower TECHNOMANCER build that's currently in the game as it currently stands. Let's be honest, one of the best builds that actually exists in this game, and how it's actually going to get even better when we actually add in the packs trees and we add in the ascension trees. So before we get into it, make sure you drop a like and a subscribe on the channel. It really does help the channel out, and let's get right into it. Alright, so before we get into it, let's make a basis as to what the meta build is and how the best way to be able to run this. So currently, overall, if you ask the official Outriders Discord, the best way to be able to go for this, it would be Play-Doh-Bear's Ultimate Endgame TECHNOMANCER. So we'll drop a link over to that, which fully goes in depth. It explains everything around the build, basically how to play TECHNOMANCER, all that kind of good stuff. So make sure you go over there and show some love if you haven't already. But basically, this is the skill tree. This is the gear as well. Now, I do agree with the majority of this. Personally, I want to be able to put my own touch on this, and there's a couple of amendments that I would personally go for, but let's have a quick look into everything. So in terms of the gear, in terms of the guns, pretty much everything is absolutely spot on, and obviously the mods are probably the best in class to be able to grab, to be able to increase your firepower, and to be able to increase your damage exponentially when you actually do the expeditions. The couple of amendments that I would personally make when it comes to the skill tree is just purely taking off the one that gives you additional anomaly power, because anomaly power doesn't help or benefit your blighted rounds, and he has picked up the 6% increase to vulnerability, which personally I would rather have a 10% increase to my health and an additional 10% damage to freeze. Personally, I find the 10% damage to freeze, considering how much freeze damage we are actually doing with this build, is better than the 6% when it comes to vulnerable. But this is just a personal choice. I'm not saying that it's in any way, shape, or form like better, and this is the only way to be able to run it or anything like that. You make your own mind up when it comes to that and best way to be able to gear it. But I like having that additional 10% health because TECHNOMANCERs are actually a little bit squishy, and then obviously getting that additional damage when it comes to being frozen. So the best way to be able to do it in terms of skills, we are looking at Blighted Turret, Blighted Rounds, and Cold Snap. Blighted Turret is the way to be able to activate the capstone when we do have our Blighted Rounds going. Blighted Rounds, we should never run out of those when it comes to actually in-game, and this is where the majority of our damage actually comes from. And Cold Snap is a great crowd control skill to be able to trigger, one, inflicting so much freeze on pretty much everywhere on the map, so that we don't actually have to worry about our guns triggering it every single second, but also on top of that, because we do have Icicle Storm when it comes to the chest piece for the Robe of the Borealis Monarch, we are actually detonating them to be able to inflict some really big, really nice damage numbers when it comes to crowd control that side. So all in all, this is the best way. It's pretty much common knowledge. This is the best way to be able to run TECHNOMANCERs, and I'll put both builds up on the screen as you can see, and alternate between the two of them. So now the next thing for us to do is look at where this build could actually get going when it comes to WorldSlayer and how it can potentially improve. Now obviously this build will improve when you get your Apocalypse gear and obviously start getting 3 mods, especially on your gun and especially onto your armor. If you're able to get a gun with everything that we can currently see, as well as like Dark Sacrifice or Killing Spree, then you're just going to be laughing, and all the way to the bank. But basically, what we're going to do is we're going to go into the packs trees first, and then we'll go into the ascension trees. Now, when it comes to the packs trees for the TECHNOMANCER, it's commonly taken that the top tree is purely for damage and the bottom tree is for support rather than firepower against anomaly power. So in terms of the top tree, I do think this is going to be the primary way to be able to increase our DPS, and it's probably the main way that the speedrunners are actually going to start gearing themselves up towards. So if we go for the first one, we go for Initial Striker, where activating skills increases our anomaly or our firepower by 15% for 5 seconds, which is depending on which is higher. So we're getting a nice 15% firepower bonus just from purely doing what we already do when we activate our 40% weapon damage when it comes to our Blighted Turret. Going from there, we do have the choice of either Brain Dead or Lethal Devices. Now, I don't think Lethal Devices is really going to help us out here. I suppose technically you could make an argument that Cold Snap can now actually be a really nice way to be able to trigger freeze as well as Toxic, and then obviously being able to do a little bit of damage for a crowd control kind of skill. But I do think that Brain Dead is going to be the main way to be able to go for, because we're increasing our weapon damage even more by activating our Cold Snap, our Blighted Turret, as well as our Blighted Rounds. So I do think that additional 15% is just pretty much a no-brainer, so we're just going to go for that one. Going from there, we do have Painkiller. Now, Painkiller damaging an enemy grants you 5% health regen for 3 seconds, and this stacks up to 2 times. Now, on paper, this doesn't sound very good, but I guarantee you that this is going to be one of the best ones to be able to go for, and this is going to give you the additional weapon damage that this build actually does need. And what I mean by this is because we do have the tier 2 mod, which is called the Cycle. Now, the Cycle, when you actually get health regen, for every single 1% of health regen that you actually have on your character at that time, gives you a 10% weapon damage bonus. So the fact that we can now have, well, up to 10% health regen for 3 seconds, as long as we're continuously firing and continuously shooting enemies, we're getting that weapon damage bonus. Means we'll see the maximum amount of damage that the cycle can actually provide. Now, unfortunately, even though the cycle will actually keep going up, the more health regen that you actually stack and all that, the more the item card will actually show in terms of damage-wise, and it will just keep going up and up. We've seen it in excess of, I think if I remember right, over 160%, maybe even like 200%, and it still keeps going. But unfortunately, the maximum you can actually get from the cycle mod is 60% weapon damage, which means by the time you've actually hit an enemy twice with this, even though you're getting 10% health regen, only 6% of that health regen will actually count towards the cycle. But that 60% weapon damage just from actually shooting enemies is going to be huge. So I do think that the cycle is going to be one of the best mods to actually take into the endgame when it comes to WorldSlayer, and I guarantee you that people will actually start using that mod. I for one am already trying to find out where I can actually put it into my current build, and then as soon as the Apocalypse gear starts dropping and I can actually start getting a few extra mods in there, the cycle is definitely going to be making its way on there as soon as I get my 3rd PAX point. So going from there, I think it's kind of a bit obvious when we actually go into the latter trees when it comes to PAX points, because the middle one is all about sniper weapons, so we don't want to touch that, and then when the other one is about status power and dealing damage comparable to our anomaly power, so I don't think that's really going to help us out too much when it comes to it, so therefore that just leaves us with the top tree. Now, permanence increases inflicting toxic on an enemy has a 100% chance to inflict a random additional status, and then dissection allows us to be able to deal 10% more damage to enemies for every single status that's inflicted on them. So the more we actually focus on one target, the more times we're inflicting toxic due to our blighted rounds, the more statuses that are going to get applied, the more damage that we actually do over time. So therefore I do think that dissection is going to be the capstone to be able to look out for, and I do think that this is going to be the tree to be for any kind of like speedrunners, any kind of like dedicated solo Technomancer firepower meta Jesus, that's a bit of a mouthful, kind of players, that this is the way to be able to actually build your Technomancer to do max DPS. Now, we do have one additional way to be able to actually run this build, and this is just a bit of a hot take. I don't think this is going to be like the main DPS or anything like that, but I do think it's a nice way if you actually do run into co-op to be able to actually offer some additional status or like damage, as well as additional healing and all that to you yourself and all your teammates. So what you could do is theoretically go for the bottom tree and go for the Undying, which increases for every 10% of our missing health, our weapon leech and our skill leech increase by 10%. You could then go to Accelerator, where your weapon damage is increased by 50% of your weapon's leech, so the lower health you are, the more weapon damage you're going to be dealing. Grabbing Apothecary, where you pulse every 5 seconds, healing all the players within a 20-meter radius for 5% of all the damage that's done to you done by you between each pulse, which, considering you're a meta firepower Technomancer, you're going to be doing a heck of a lot of damage, which means that you're actually going to be able to keep all your teammates all topped up. You could go for the turrets, but considering we only have the one turret to be able to chuck out, I don't think that's going to be like the main one to be able to go for. So then in that case, I would go middle tree and actually go for Biosync, where your overheal is converted into 3 seconds of health regen effect for you and your allies, which obviously you can then benefit from the cycle mod once again. And then Kinetic Converter, critical shots heal the nearest ally for 25% of their max health, and if overheal occurs, the player also receives 20% increased damage for 5 seconds. So I think this is going to be a nice way to be able to increase your damage as standard. It's also going to be a nice way to be able to keep your teammates all topped up, nice and healthy, and I also think it's a great way to be able to increase your own damage. I don't think it's necessarily going to be the best way to be able to increase your damage, so if you are purely looking at DPS, then this is not going to be the way to be able to go for it, but I do think this is a nice team player, which also still offers some DPS solutions to yourself. Looking into the Ascension tree, so this is kind of obvious because we are going for firepower builds, so I would highly recommend that we start working our way towards weapon damage as standard, and then going from there into long range damage. Now, as Technomancer, technically, because you are so squishy, you could actually go in and make an argument and go for health or armor, but personally I think because of how much health regen is actually offered in the PAX trees, I don't think that's the best way to be able to go for it. I think you're actually able to keep yourself nice and topped up just purely doing that. So as such, I would maximize the DPS as much as possible. So definitely recommend going for weapon damage, definitely recommend going for long range damage, possibly then either go into armor piercing or close range damage, and then maybe weapons magazine size from there. So obviously you can change whatever order you want in that, but I do think that's the best way to be able to actually go into it. So there we have it, that's everything that we currently know about the Technomancer's firepower meta build, and I do think this is going to be one of the strongest builds to actually take into WorldSlayer. Let's be honest, it's one of the strongest builds that's currently in the game as it is right now, so it's only going to go from strength to strength. I do think they got one of the weaker buffs from the pack trees compared to other better builds when we've actually had a look through the pack trees, but I think that's mainly down to for the fact of how strong it is in the first place. If they started doing any kind of like wacky buffs, then obviously it would just get skyrocket out of control. But I do think it's got more than enough to be able to actually handle any kind of like content that we're expecting, and I for one am very excited for one of my favourite builds to actually start getting a few more buffs. So that just pretty much wraps this up. So thank you very much for watching to the end of the video. Let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts are on it. Would you do anything different? Is there anything that you would potentially suggest, or is there any kind of like gear that you've actually seen out on the socials that you would think would actually be a perfect fit for this build going forward? Massive thank you to obviously making it way all the way to the end of the video. Massive thank you to the Babylonian family as always for their continued support. It really does mean the world to us. And that just leaves me to say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.